Hello, everyone. I'm going to talk a little bit about geopolitics, specifically about the US and China. I think it was Bismark who said that, it was him who said, free trade is the weapon of the strong. Tariffs and sanctions are the weapons of the weak. Let's see. Okay. My point about all these tariffs and sanctions in China, if I can summarize it, is that a superpower like the United States cannot go around defending itself like this. China rose economically for sure. I mean, tremendous speed. But I contend that China is not an existential geopolitical threat to the United States. It is not going to invade the United States. This whole thing is this is an economics thing. But the US translates this meteoric rise as if the US, if we are not the first, the world will kind of disintegrate and fall apart and burnt into ashes and, an apocalypse. No. It could be very simple. It could be that China does things better than you do. If they dominate the world of drones, it is because they do it better than you do. If they dominate the world of electric cars, it's because they do it better than you do. If they got to the dark side of the moon and return, it's because they know how to do that. If Tsinghua University is better than MIT, don't blame them. If Russia, with half of the population of the United States, can have so many scientists and engineers working on hypersonic weapons, and it takes you 2 years to produce what they produce in 2 months, well, it is because they do it better than you do. It does not necessarily mean that China is a threat to global security. It's just that you don't do things as well as they do. Don't blame them. It's you who are not doing things as well. My point is this, that the United States has to reset. They have to reset, okay? One of the central problems is that the US grand strategy is now obsolete. And I say this not because I'm going around with a red beret saying Viva Fidel or singing the Internationale. This is a technical thing. If the US is there in Eurasia, giving everyone a hard time, really, something inherited perhaps from British imperialism, all you have to do is to get out of there. Let me explain. If I am looking at a map here, it's from, this was written on the 19th of January 2023. It's Solidarity Net from Australia. And it says US bases positioned for war against China. And they give you a map there with all the, the first islands chain and then the second island chain. Okay, in the first island chain, South Korea, so many, Japan, the East China Sea, Taiwan, the Philippines, Brunei, Malaysia, Vietnam. And then the second island chain is Guam and Australia. It says The US is the biggest bully in the Pacific, with rings of military bases blocking and threatening China, writes Tom Orszag. The US and Australian governments constantly present China as a military threat, pointing to its claims over Taiwan and its actions in the South China Sea. But the US has a far more intimidating military arsenal and has not been afraid to use it, from its invasion of Afghanistan and Iraq, pouring of weapons into Ukraine, and constant bombing of countries from Syria to Yemen, Somalia, and Libya. China is effectively encircled by US bases all across the Pacific, threatening a catastrophic war between the world's two greatest powers. The US became the preeminent power in the Pacific after the defeat of Japan in 1945. It was US military power that won the war, eclipsing the old imperial powers of Britain, France, and the Netherlands, who began retreating from their Asian colonies. Since then, the US has sought to maintain control over the entire Pacific Ocean through a string of bases, and it is now expanding its military footprint in the area further as part of preparations for war against China. The island chain, in 1951, US military planners developed the first island chain security theory in an effort to preserve US control of the Pacific right up to the Chinese coastline. This was a response to the development of the Cold War in Asia. In October 1949, the US-backed Kuomintang lost the civil war in China to the Chinese Communist Party and fled to Taiwan. Then the US fought a bloody war in Korea against North Korean and Chinese troops, backed by Russia. Just as the US Joint Army and Navy Board developed War Plan Orange for a possible war with Japan in the 20s and 30s, the US developed plans for war against China. It sought to secure a first chain or fence stretching from the Japanese islands to Taiwan, the Philippines, and the island of Borneo, split mainly between Malaysia and Indonesia. The threat of US firepower stopped Chinese efforts to reclaim Taiwan in 1954 and 1958. The US also established new military bases across South Korea and occupied Japan and re-established control of bases in the Philippines, which had been a US colony before the war. Now, the active duty, most of these bases remain active today. In 2021, the U.S. Defense Magazine 1945 wrote that, quote, the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command has some 375,000 military and civilian personnel working across the Asian Pacific. The U.S. maintains 56,000 active duty military personnel at more than 80 bases and other facilities across Japan. 80 bases in Japan, the most in any one country outside the U.S. About half are based in Okinawa. Through the Cold War, the U.S. pointed nuclear weapons at China from bases in Japan, Taiwan, and South Korea. Nuclear weapons were moved from Okinawa to the Iwakuni base near Hiroshima in 1966. When the U.S. ambassador to Japan, Edwin O. Reischauer, learned of their presence, which was a violation of the treaty with Japan. He told the U.S. State Department that he would resign and go public with the information if they were not removed within 90 days. The weapons were removed shortly thereafter. I don't know what happened to the ambassador. Improvements in ballistic missile technology and nuclear armed submarines mean that the U.S. no longer needs these nuclear weapons bases. Today, there are still 5,000 Marines and 2 Air Force squadrons stationed at Iwakuni. Okay, so it goes on explaining and then explaining about the second chain and all that. Okay, so the Chinese are encircled there, okay? As the Russians are encircled, but somehow it is the Chinese who are a threat, a military threat to the United States. The Chinese are not posing a challenge to you, the United States, in Eurasia. What is happening is the Chinese are posing a challenge to you in the wider global world in the economy, from the Arctic to the Antarctic. And not only on the water surface, as Rear Admiral Dennis Moynihan said, but also from the bottom of the sea to the top of the heavens. And that's true in commerce, in technology, in just about everything. So, okay, so how does the U.S. react to this? Okay, tariffs, sanctions, and we'll take Greenland. So are we back now to the 1930s? I'll just invade, I'll just take. It's a different vision of geopolitics. Look, in the continent, Bismarck, for example, Germany and all that, what determined geopolitics, the strategies, was mainly earth, or, well, shall I say, land, soil, geography. Land and geopolitics are joined in that vision. Well, I think Americans follow more the English strategy, democracy, trade, and so on. So, or freedom. We want to take freedom to the rest of the world. But this is my problem. A democratic empire is a contradiction in terms. Something has to give in here. Okay, which road? Democracy or empire? They don't go together. An opportunity was missed. I feel that I'm seeing, lost opportunities everywhere. When the opportunity was there to do something with China, they went and imposed barriers and custom barriers and tariffs and sanctions and so on. Fine. Okay. So that's what they did. Fine. Then China says, all right, we shall impose sanctions on you too. We shall no longer export to you rare earth minerals. Sorry. And where do we find rare earth minerals? Anyone? In Greenland. Oh, but they say, but we're not just going to take it. We'll hold a referendum there. And yeah. That reminds me of Poland. I think I told you this story before. After the Second World War, when the Allies split up Europe, Stalin and Churchill and Truman by that time. Okay, you can have the influence in the east of Europe and we'll have it on the west. Some people say that the Russians just came. No, the Russians came in to defeat The Germans, yeah, but then they sat down and they said, okay, this is for you, this is for you, okay? And they were quite happy to give Poland to be under the influence of the Soviets. Stalin said, oh, can I please also have sort of Königsberg here, Kaliningrad? Yeah, you can have it. So they kept it, okay? But Poland, apparently we had gone to war over Poland being invaded, and now they were quite happy to give it to Stalin. Stalin couldn't believe it. He said, okay, so you're giving me Poland. They said, yeah, oh, but you must hold an election, actually, okay? Well, you can imagine Stalin said, oh, so you're giving me Poland, and what I have to do is to hold an election. Yeah. All right. Well, I'll hold an election. No, I'll tell you what. I'll hold 3. I'll hold however many you want. I'll hold 10. How many do you want? A referendum in Greenland. Okay, so a democratic empire is a little bit of a contradiction. Look, the Chinese have experienced specialists working away 24/7 like little ants everywhere, looking at situations way ahead. They saw the Arctic, the situation in the Arctic is changing. Fine, so Arctic, important. So how did the Chinese enter this agreement to be part of this Arctic thing? It's really amazing. The opposite of how the US wants to do it. This is what they did. Look, this is an example, okay? During the 2008 economic crisis, okay? May we say organized, administered, and, by the US. Yes, with their unbridled financing and so on and all the rest of it. Anyway, so what happens? Iceland sinks. I mean, not not literally, but economically, but almost, okay, like everybody else, okay, as many other countries. Iceland has about 200,000 inhabitants. What does China do? Because the Chinese had already been studying the Arctic. What was happening there? What does China do? Having studied the situation in the Arctic and all the changes, they were prepared. They were ready. What did they do? They came over and gave Iceland money. They gave them money. In other words, the US caused the problem. The Chinese came there to fix it. Because they've been looking at things long term, you see, very long term. And so now they're ready. How do they give them money? Oh, and by the way, they gave Europe a slap on the face too, but in any case, okay. Some countries in the European Union had asked Iceland if they could fish in their waters, if they could just come and fish. Some just came without asking. Iceland said, go to hell to all of you, and no, you can't fish here. And then come the Chinese. Look, they said politely, we know it is your fish and you can do with it whatever you want because it is yours. But we come to you with a different approach. Our approach to you, Iceland, is this. You go and fish as much as you can in your own waters. All of you, the 200,000 inhabitants, okay? Fish as much as you can. We'll buy it from you. Guaranteed. Go ahead, fish and prosper. We'll buy it. Iceland, in the midst of this economic chaos, were only too happy to have these guaranteed. They went ahead, then created the Arctic Council, and they called the Chinese and brought them into the Arctic Council. And the Chinese signed, quite happily, a free trade agreement with them. Now imagine, where are the Chinese in relation to the Arctic? 1,000,000 miles away. What are they doing? What are the Chinese doing in the Arctic Council? Well, there they are. They thought ahead. The Americans have an Arctic coast, and a very large one, as a matter of fact. But they have to take over Greenland by fair means or foul kind of thing. While the Chinese got in, no problem. They got in a more, let us say, balanced way. Because the Chinese have an excellent administration. They do. They have these people there looking at everything, analyzing, studying, and then they pass their findings and suggestions up the hierarchy to their superiors, and their superiors read their reports, and because they are well organized, they pay attention to them. And that doesn't happen in the United States. Up to a point, the people at the bottom may be doing lots of studies and analysis, but then when you get to a certain thing here in the hierarchy, they seem to be following more the politics or whatever it is, or their own careers, or telling people in power whatever they want to hear. It seems to me that that is how they do it. But if things continue like this, the US will lose. The Chinese will win. Unless the United States decides to start massively and savagely actually bombing China from above. That's always a possibility. Bombing everything that moves. In Cambodia, 3 million people dead. The instructions were that just bomb everything that moves. Anyway, that's just Cambodia. So it could be argued that the Chinese strategy is better than the American strategy. So whenever you think about the Chinese strategy and the American strategy, think of this example of Iceland. How do the Chinese manage to be there in the Arctic? Because of what they call win-win. And how about Denmark? Yes, Greenland is supposed to belong to them. Okay, a good ally of the United States, one of the better ones perhaps. They already banned China from their having the Silk Road thing there and so on. So it's a good ally of the United States. And the United States is going to take Greenland from them. I mean, is this a... And Denmark will be there saying, oh yes, of course, the people voted against us. How happy we are. It's just like Olaf Scholz, of Germany, with the Nord Stream 2, and there he is in Washington, smiling away while Biden is saying that they will destroy Nord Stream, and they say, "Oh, thank you for taking Greenland, thank you for Nord Stream." The world has changed. I don't think many Americans realize it. the same with, I won't go into this, but very quickly it's the same with the thing about Israel. Look, but the world has changed, and they continue with this old. In the 1960s, for example, what did Americans think? Okay, they thought, I'm against the Vietnam War, I am in favor of civil rights, I am in favor of women's rights, I am in favor of the State of Israel because it's the only democracy in that area of the world. They haven't realized that, or they don't want to, that Israel has moved, has changed. Okay, two problems. For example, South Africa accuses Israel of the big G word. And the International Criminal Court wants to prosecute the ex-former defense minister, Gallant, and the Prime Minister, Netanyahu. And how does the US react? They punish the court. They punish the judges, not the accused. It's they continue in this 1960 model of thinking. But the world has changed since then. In the 60s, there are documents about this, how the Arabists, the students of the Middle East, okay, the assessors and so on, in the State Department, said that we should not support Israel too much all the time, because they saw it clearly then, because we are going to alienate the whole region against us. It was said in the 60s. Where are we now? Why do Americans, why are they unable to do what they have always done so well, actually? And just, be realistic about things and put an end to crazy strategies and bring them back to a sort of a reasoned strategy. What happened? Are they captured? What? There's a very painful crisis, a brutal crisis going on in America right now. And this happens when it's not the first time, this happens when a political system can no longer meet social demands. And the first time it happened in the 20th century in Europe, for example, was with Mussolini in the 1920s. After World War I, Italy was, not only Italy, but I'm using the Mussolini example, Italy was a mess. People had moved from the countryside to the city and searching for, seeking work, and there was anarchy, there were strikes, a whole mess, in short. All authority gone. The institutions could no longer guarantee anything, and no one trusted them. Law and order no longer worked. And so, of course, the people moved on to want a providential figure there. It happens so many times in history. It means the system, as it is, no longer works. Is no longer fit for purpose. The US has reached a point where they truly need to reset. And so now they find themselves, they were not paying attention or whatever, or perhaps they were, but they didn't mind at the time. They find themselves having to pursue this monster, China. I say monster, I don't say monstrosity, but this huge thing, China, that is surpassing them in just about everything. And I think the US is scared. It's desperately trying to keep up, not to miss the beat, as it were, of that absolute power they had during the unipolar period between the 1990s and 2014. And this could lead to a real confrontation, a real one. At first, it could start with, economics, financial, technological, but which could escalate and become something more. It might be a matter of time, because the US is not doing well, and China is doing well. I mean, some people say that the economy is down, is up, and so on, but they're doing well. It's advancing very rapidly. It's advancing much, much more than the US. And what do they have? Well, okay, the dollar. Okay, but the world is de-dollarizing, as we all know, again because of abuses. Nations, as I said in the previous video, 2 videos ago, nations have to get along with their neighbors. They want to trade with whomever they want. They're looking after their own interests. No, they can't do that. They have to do this and they have to do that. So sanctions against you. Well, if you're going to sanction me, everyone can understand this. If you're going to sanction me and destroy my economy if I don't go along with everything you want of me, which might go against my own interest as a country, then if there is something else, another organization or another way of doing things, sure, I'll go with them. But if the dollar sinks, the US sinks, and the dollar is ceasing to be strong, or is increasingly less strong. And the US has to contend with all that expense that they have. In many cases, the cost of keeping a nation afloat, obviously, those expenses, but in their case also the cost of empire. I mean, Pentagon, the intelligence services, the 850 bases around the world, the diplomatic services, the spies, the administration. That is an absolute fortune. And it has been several times on the verge of default, being unable to pay the debt. And so in order to regain some of their strength, they are quite happy to come and inflict harm on the rest of Europe. And it's coming for Europe actually with a vengeance. This is what I mean. That we in Europe, however much we wreck our own economies, as we are doing at the moment, we cannot rescue the United States. Even if our whole economies, even if they collapse, we wouldn't be able to rescue the United States. The United States has a budget deficit of about, $3 trillion a year. So anyway, but they want European countries now, this is my point, they want European countries now to multiply threefold or fivefold. I believe that President Trump said fivefold, but that's probably just to, the art of the deal and so on. He'll probably be happy with 3% or something. But in any case, to multiply the European countries' military budget come on, it's not really to defend ourselves from the Russians, okay? They have to have a story, but it can't be that. No one believes that anymore. It is in order to subsidize, for the European countries, to subsidize their American military-industrial complex, which costs them 10 times more than the Russians spend. But when it comes down to it, they don't even have enough ammunition for Ukraine. It's a kind of scam. And so now what we have is NATO's head, Rutte, the head of NATO, saying, we have to increase it to 5%, 3%, and give it all to the U.S. military complex. But that will not be enough either. And even if it were, which it won't, even if you force the provinces of the empire to pay up for their expenses, remember what happened to Rome. Remember how Americans themselves dealt with the English in that Tea Party thing. Remember what happened to the Aztecs, who were abusing all the other tribes around them in Mexico, going around they needed to sacrifice to the gods, and they wouldn't use their own people. They used to go around all the other tribes and bring them along and sacrifice the other people to their gods. And what happened to them? Well, someone came along, with 200 Spaniards, and all the other tribes united with them to fight the Aztecs. They had managed to attract to themselves that level of ire, So even if Europe increased their NATO budget to 5%, which will not happen because we don't have the money, we wouldn't be able to solve all Americans' problems. The country, the US, and the contributions of its people, they have been I don't know how many times I said this, but the poor Americans have been contributing with their dollars, for decades and decades. And I truly believe that they were robbed blind. Anyway, in any case, the US is the most powerful country in the world, 25% of the world's GDP. That is not a good measure of wealth, really. The purchasing power parity is much better about, how much people earn and how much they can spend with what they earn, what they can buy. That is a much better. But in any case, it doesn't matter. Never mind. The point is that they cannot continue to believe that they can command the world in the same way they did in 1945, when their GDP was 50%, and they had 70% of the gold the world gold reserves. That world is gone. Back then there were 51 countries in the UN, now 180. In 1945, Africa didn't count. Colonialism. China didn't count. It was as poor as Haiti. India didn't count. Asia didn't count. They simply have to see that the United States, that they cannot govern in the same way. How they can't see it, I don't know. Do you? In the Bretton Woods summit, 40 countries gathered there. Today in the UN, as I said, 180. Many of the countries that didn't count at all back then are today at the forefront, among other things, in technology. The global south, so-called, China, India, the Muslim world. That's 50% of humanity. You cannot just go about sprinkling sanctions and tariffs to all and sundry like holy water or something. It's a joke. So they want Europe to mint more money to give it to their military industrial complex. Well, you can say NATO, whatever. Tell you a story because I think that this reflects that the Russians and the Chinese have lost all respect for the United States. Why? I was actually listening to a diplomat, European, who was there during this some time ago, okay, who was there while there was a meeting going on, the Chinese and a high-ranking American official. And look, the Chinese are very, very polite people. Okay, they are the most polite people in the whole world, I think. Okay, you cannot. It's not only that they won't speak openly and loudly and badly about their opponents. Is that even their gestures, even their body language, they are polite people. Okay, you cannot read them, right, easily. And this diplomat actually said, and he said, I couldn't believe it when a Chinese diplomat said about the Americans. He said, they don't even know who their enemies are. They have no idea of what they're doing. They don't even know who their enemies are. That coming from a Chinese is quite a lot. It's a lot. This was said, as I said, quite a long time ago, when they abandoned Afghanistan. Not this last time, when they left Afghanistan and went to Iraq. Okay, so that was in 2003. Okay, and when the Chinese saw them going to Iraq, they said they don't know what they're doing. A superpower cannot behave like that. Which reminds me, actually, what Benedict XVI, the Pope, said at one time, talking about power. He said something like, when you get to the top, to that position of power, he said, unless you are insane, you have to be responsible. It's not like a 2-year-old with a tantrum. I want this, I want that, give it to me, and sewing corpses everywhere. I wanted to talk about something else, but I'm going to leave it for another video, I think. I'll stop here. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.